Respected keynote speaker of the event, Mr. Hemant K. Batra, Vice President, SARC Law Council, mediator and arbitrator. Respected Principal and Dean, Law College Dehradun, Uttaranchal University, Professor Dr. Rajesh Bahuguna Sir. Respected HOD Law, Law College Dehradun, Professor Dr. Poonam Rawat Ma'am. Participants from all across the globe, ladies and gentlemen, a very pleasant afternoon to all. I, on behalf of Law College Dehradun, Faculty of Uttaranchal University, welcome you to this edifying international lecture on the topic Media Trial, a Distorted Vigilant Practice. Taking the event further, I request respected Dean Sir to kindly welcome the gathering and introduce the keynote speaker. Sir.
Okay, thank you so much, Tanya. Uh, on the occasion of this international lecture on media trial, today's keynote speaker, Mr. Hemant K. Batraji, Honorable Vice President of SARC Law, Head of the Department, Law College Dehradun, Professor Poonam Rawat Ma'am, President of Training and Recruitment Division of the college, Ms. Akanksha Bhatt, and all the office bearer of TRD. Dear participants from this university and all other university from India and abroad, I extend my greetings to all of you. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my proud privilege to welcome you on this occasion. So I welcome you on the behalf of Training and Recruitment Division of Law College Dehradun. I welcome you on the behalf of Uttaranchal University family. And also I take the privilege to welcome you from the land of God and Goddess, Uttarakhand. So you all are welcome in this lecture series. Ladies and gentlemen, this have always been endeavor of the TRD of the college to organize guest lectures, particularly on the topic which are either of the contemporary ethos, debate and discussions, or certain topics which are not directly taught in class, or either they are not part of the syllabi directly. So before that, we have already presented before you speakers on different such topics, like alternative dispute resolution system in general, mediation, arbitration, conciliation, negotiation in particular, artificial intelligence, affirmative actions, and so on. And today is the day of media trial. I think most debatable and contemporary issue of the time. And for this, we have with us today, rather we are privileged to have with us Mr. Hemant K. Batraji, Vice President of SARC Law. So as I am asked to introduce Mr. Batra, so ladies and gentlemen, introduction of Mr. Batra is not new to the legal luminaries, but still, as I am asked to do so, Mr. Batra began his lecture career, legal career in 1991, when he was admitted to the prestigious New Delhi Bar and inducted into one of the India's largest firm of solicitor, Amarchand, then AMHS. In 1995, he co-founded Kesar Das B and Associate, KDB, as managing partner of its corporate office. In 2003, he had founded Kadam Baris brand, a global alliance of law firms, and later on in 2005, founded an international KPO called Caden Barry's Consulting Private Limited. He is a well-acclaimed writer with 6 diverse books to his authorship, including Eastern Book Company as a publisher. He wrote the first ever textbook on SARC. Mr. Hemant is visiting guest speaker at various international universities and institutions, including the Harvard Law School. He has spoken as a speaker at more than 175 international conferences, seminars, workshops on various topics of the commercial importance. He was awarded prestigious Mahatma Gandhi Seva Medal by the Gandhi Global Foundation for effectively connecting legal communities of SAARC nations. Mr. Batra is the elected vice president of SAARC Law, South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation in Law, a regional apex body of SAARC established in 1990, and being the largest serving Secretary General of SAARC Law, that is almost for 10 years. He is the chair of the South Asia Committee of Indian National Bar Association. Also is an elected lifetime member of General Assembly of Union of International Association, UIA, a research institute and documentation center based in Brussels since 2018. And above all, a thorough gentleman as I know him. So with this, once again, Mr. Batra Saab, I'm taking this privilege to welcome you on the behalf of Uttaranchal University. You are most welcome on this occasion. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I'm not taking much of the time as we all are waiting eagerly to listen, Mr. Batra. So thank you so much, and over to Tanya for further.
Thank you, sir. The link of feedback form and attendance list is available in the chat box. Participants are requested to kindly maintain the decorum and please do not open the audio or video during the session. I would like to invite the keynote speaker of the event, Mr. Hemant Batra, sir, to please begin with the lecture. Sir.
Thank you, Professor Bahuguna, for your kind words and introduction. Hope you have got the right person in front of you, because he said so much about me. I don't know whether I'll be able to live up to the expectations of all the viewers and listeners. Well, good afternoon, friends, viewers, participants, ladies and gentlemen. It gives me immense pleasure to be interacting with you virtually, as you know, times are still turbulent and trying. But I do see bright light at the end of the tunnel, which is definitely a note of optimism. I'm happy that, you know, I have been invited to speak on a topic which has gained, you know, huge importance, a lot of interest in the past few months, though it has been a subject matter of concern, I would say, for many years now. And good that we are discussing openly, debating openly about this issue. The topic being media trial, a distorted vigilante practice. Benjamin Franklin, you know, once said that it takes many good deeds to build a good reputation, and only one bad one to lose it. He said this in the 18th century. And when he made this statement, he did not visualize and contemplate that upon whom would that bad deed be attributable. He probably, you know, assumed that it is the person concerned who himself indulges in good as well as bad deed. What happens if the bad deed has not actually happened? Or has not been done at all, but is a mere perception, which is created by third parties. And the same perception is embraced by the world at large as a fact, as a reality, as an opinion. It could be subjective or even biased, but taking form of a reality. This is what is happening with media, be it electronic or print, television channels or newspapers. They start parallel vigilante practice justice system. And you know what vigilante is. A member of self-appointed group of citizens who undertake law enforcement in their community without legal authority, typically because the legal agencies are thought to be inadequate. I do not mind investigative journalism, and nobody should. But I definitely object to parallel vigilante courtrooms or trials conducted in the TV studios or the face of the newspapers or social media channels like Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, etc. Talking in specific about the electronic media trials, these trials are conducted in a summary manner where the TV anchor or a moderator becomes the unassailable and impregnable judge. And then there is a set of jury, the so-called panelists, each one of them harboring and holding callous bias and deadly prejudices. And mind it, the anchor who considers himself or herself as a demigod can override that jury verdict. The person or individual being the subject matter of the debate can be declared guilty and a convict of a heinous crime in a summary manner in just one debate, which vigilante verdict then keeps on echoing in series of future debates. And this is, again, mind it, notwithstanding that the matter where the media has given its verdict is still pending investigation and far from having gone for the court trial under the domains of rule of law. And that is not all. There have been instances of even extortion. Extortion being reported to the law enforcement authorities against some reporters and journalists. But, having said that, there are bad eggs in every walk of life, in every realm of business and profession. There is bad, ugly, unprofessional, and unethical media, but there is also fair, prudent, professionally balanced, and responsible media. So we cannot, make a sweeping statement and paint the entire media and press as being biased. But overwhelmingly, the impression what we are getting about them is not very pleasing. And that is why we have assembled today to discuss this topic. I am here also reminded of Marshall McLuhan, a Canadian philosopher. You must read about his work, whose work is among the cornerstones of the study of media theory. He once said that all media exist to invest our lives with artificial perceptions and arbitrary values. Artificial perception and artificial values. So, this was enough of, I would say, metaphysical or philosophical chat by me so as to, introduce the topic. Let us now discuss media trial from a legal perspective, from a theoretical perspective and settled law perspective in the Indian context. Before I do that, let me also quickly take you through the layman's definition of media trial. Though many of you would know, but still, it may be worthwhile to discuss. Trial by media came to light primarily, or let us say, it became popular phrase in the late 20th century and early 21st century to describe the impact of television and newspapers or newspaper coverage on a person's reputation by creating a widespread perception of guilt or innocence. before or after, verdict of court of law. Now, during high publicity court cases, the media are often accused of, provoking an atmosphere of public hysteria akin to a lynch mob, which not only makes a fair trial nearly impossible, but means that regardless of the result of the trial, in public perception, the accused is already held guilty and would not be able to live the rest of their life or his life or her life without intense public scrutiny. So the operating part of definition or agenda of the media trial being creation of widespread perception. I'm sure many of you would remember that in 2015, one young woman from Delhi posted a photo of a young man on Facebook and accused him of sexual harassment. It's in public domain. The Facebook post went viral, which was followed by a media trial, labeling that man with terms like pervert, the predator of Delhi, and so on and so forth. 4 years later, that man was held innocent by the Delhi court and was acquitted of all charges of sexual harassment or outraging the modesty of a woman. However, during the time, the man had lost his job and could not find any other source of income due to such media coverage. This is the kind of damage media trial can cause to the lives of innocent people. I fail to understand that how the courts of law in India at the first instance enabled, allowed, permitted trial by media to happen, when the expression media trial itself is absolutely unlawful according to me. It's illegal. If one was to go through Criminal Procedure Code, for instance, CRPC 1973, just go through it, and you will find that the expression trial finds its mention at nearly 300 places. It has been used 300 times in CRPC, the expression trial. Section 4 of CRPC, for instance, says that all offenses under the Indian Penal Code shall be investigated, inquired into, tried, or otherwise dealt with only by CRPC or only under the provisions of CRPC. Likewise, Civil Procedure Code uses CPC 1908 uses trial expression at nearly 50 places. But then how media assume policing, enforcement, and investigative and judicial and magisterial powers? How did they assume it? How come it happened? Why has it been permitted? Well, there is a history and substance behind it. Let me discuss that with you. How could media get such a liberty that they literally took over the role of police and judiciary? In my view, friends, there are 4 prime reasons which let the cat out of the bag. Or in other words, which gave unequivocal autonomy to the media and the press. Firstly, the press and media have been recognized since many decades as one of the 4 pillars of the nation's governance, or let us say democracy. It is the 4th estate of governance. It was recognized as such in Britain, in Great Britain, and then borrowed from there in India as well, the concept. Since the British rule, press has been considered or equated with an organ of the government. Rather, I would say a safety check of the governance. So that was reason 1 why they became popular, media. Secondly, the freedom of press gained utmost significance under the Indian Constitution. It became undoubtedly a constitutional embodiment. Their freedom is guaranteed as a fundamental right under the domain of freedom of speech and expression, as we all know, that is cherished under Article 19(1)(a) of the Constitution of India. In the last 3 decades, I have, because you are young, we all have witnessed, Professor Bahuguna would also have witnessed, massive growth or revolution in the distribution and broadcasting of entertainment and information through satellite, cable, and internet-based networks, channels, and social media platforms. There has been revolution. They have literally taken over the day-to-day lives of all of us. They dominantly influence our minds, thinking process, opinions, and eventually our belief. Thirdly, the press and media enjoy an element of protection and immunity under the Contempt of Courts Act 1971. Read that also. For instance, innocent publication and distribution of matter shall not constitute contempt. Further, a person shall not be held guilty of contempt of court for publishing fair and accurate report of a judicial proceeding or any stage thereof. Also, under the same act, a person shall not be held guilty of contempt of court for publishing any fair comment on the merits of any case which has been heard and finally decided. But these provisions are so relative and subjective in nature. There is no hard and fast rule or yardstick to gauge them. And any stringent order by the courts of law, have been criticized as an onslaught, assault, ambush on the freedom of speech and expression and the press and media. So even the authorities fear them. Yes, even the authorities fear them. Fourthly, the courts of law have time and again acknowledged the freedom of speech and expression to include freedom of press due to the constitutional as well as statutory provisions or guarantees, which I discussed just now, The courts in the past were so overwhelmed with the role of press and media that they were complimenting them almost every now and then. According to the jurists and legal experts and the courts of law as well, people were entitled, Indian citizens were entitled for complete information of the day-to-day affairs through the medium of public domain, like the electronic and print media channels. And jurists even felt that free, independent, vibrant, fearless press was the sine qua non of a vibrant democratic society in a free country where there is no dictatorship or stifling of distribution of news. The courts of law maintain that the presence and continuation of free media was imperative for upholding the democratic system. That's what the court felt. And this empowered media. Absolutely. But then all these compliments, built up and, made media gain egoism and arrogance, which got to be noticed overpoweringly in the last 2 decades. And we started to see change in the approach of the courts of law regarding the premise of freedom of speech and expression. Every now and then, some case or incident catches the public attention, which is then exploited in the media for, TRPs or whatever you may brand it as. But now I see courts of law coming down heavily on the press and media for their irresponsible and reckless proceedings. And we all know about the famous Aarushi Talwar's murder case. Nearly a decade ago, the media at that stage had confirmed and asserted then as to who was guilty of the murder of Aarushi. And this was before the actual trial had even begun, had even started. The entire nation had gone into frenzies and panic over the belief that her own parents were her killers. There were media trials happening in every TV channel studios. And I'm sure the judges and courts of law were getting influenced and prejudiced. Our courts are, after all, not insulated from the outside world. Our judges are human beings. They are not computers. And this fact was acknowledged by none other than, mind it, none other than Justice Kurian Joseph of the Supreme Court of India, while he was addressing a lawyers' conference in 2015, citing pressure on the judiciary during the Nirbhaya rape case. He said that the media trials in pending cases should be avoided, and thereby judges saved of the enormous pressure, strain created by the media trials. It creates a lot of pressure on the judges. They are also human beings. He acknowledged that, and he said, referring to the amount of pressure that is built, he recalled how a judge who dealt with the case had once told him that had he not given the punishment, the media would have hung him. The media would have hung the judge, as the media had already given their verdict. The judge who went into Nirbhaya case had reasons to give the punishment, valid reasons, not because the media said it, because he had reasons on merits. But people start speculating that the judge came under undue pressure of the media. Students, you would know about Cardozo, Justice Cardozo, one of the great judges of the American Supreme Court. In his writings in the nature of judicial process, he observed, he writes beautifully, and you must read about his work. He said that the judges are subconsciously influenced by several forces. Indian Supreme Court and other courts have also acknowledged the fact in many of their judgments that judges get influenced. In one of the cases, the Supreme Court said that there is danger of serious risk of prejudice if the media exercises an unrestricted and unregulated freedom such that it publishes pictures, photos of the suspects or the accused before the identification parades are constituted, or if the media publishes statements which outrightly hold the suspect or the accused guilty, even before such an order has been passed by the court. In R.K. Anand versus Delhi High Court, the Supreme Court clearly stated, read the judgment, that it would be a sad day for the court to employ the media for getting its own house in order. And the media too would not relish that role of being the snoopers for the court. Media should perform the acts of journalism and not as a special agency for the court. That's what the court said. The impact of television and newspaper coverage on a person's reputation by creating a widespread perception of guilt, regardless of any verdict in a court of law, will not be fair, said the Supreme Court. And as famous author, you must have read his novels, John Grisham says, there is always a rush to get a judgment. There is always a rush to get a judgment. It makes a fair trial hard to get. Yes. There are several, judgments where courts have now they have resolved to strap and leash the media. Times are changing. One more observation, actually, I remember, which I recollect with regard to Supreme Court of India. It states that the presumption of innocence of an accused is a legal presumption. Such a beautiful expression. It's a legal presumption and should not be destroyed at the very threshold through the process of media trial. And that too when the investigation is pending and the investigation is pending and the media trial is opposed to the rule of law and would encroach upon the protection which is granted to the accused under Article 21 of the Constitution of India. So it is crucial for the upkeep of dignity of the courts, as well as one of the basic principles of the rule of law in a free democratic country like India, that the criticism or even the reporting, particularly in sub judice matters, must be subjected to checks and balances, so as not to interfere with the administration of justice. This is what Supreme Court said in this judgment, which I referred to. I'm forgetting the citation. There have been so many cases and matters, concerning people's lives, liberty, honor, prestige, and more in the past, which were attempted to and perhaps even got prejudiced because of the media trial by the print media and the electronic media. Some people were able to get orders against the media trial. You know what they are known as, gag orders. But there's so many who were unable to get these gag orders, and they had to suffer the stigma throughout their lives. It was like double jeopardy: trial by the court and a parallel vigilante trial by the media. But recently, we have seen a new face of media investigation going, parallel with investigation by the government agencies. We have noticed that recently. I need not spell it. I will always compliment investigative journalism so long it is unbiased or without any vested agenda. I will compliment them. The role of press and media is to inform the public, not to misinform or tutor them. The courts of law, right from bottom to the top, have complimented as well as criticized the media. Wherever the need arose, they gagged them, as I just mentioned. Well, it is better late than never. I'm happy that the courts have decided now to hold the bull by its horns. I'll take maybe 5 more minutes. Is it all right?
Yes.
At Delhi's district court, for instance, restrained a media house from publishing unsubstantiated and uncorroborated information against a former civil aviation minister regarding his alleged involvement in a money laundering case. Pending investigation, obviously. The court in the matter had observed that the plaintiff has been summoned by the investigating agency only as a witness. Therefore, publishing of any information, based on unsubstantiated and uncorroborated facts about the plaintiff cannot be said to be justified. Likewise, recently, the Madras High Court had appealed to the members of the print, visual, and social media not to misinterpret the proceedings or observations of the court with regard to hearing related to a horrific custodial death of father and son. The court had further urged that a media trial be not conducted as it may affect both the prosecution as well as the accused. Now, talking about the Indian Supreme Court, also, I have given several references already, but they have frequently and consistently, they have underlined the role of media in a democracy. They've complimented them. They've upheld the freedom of speech and expression, no doubt about it. But at the same time, the Supreme Court has also stressed the need for the media and the journalists to embark on a responsible coverage. Supreme Court has said that many a times. In one of the cases, the Supreme Court had observed that it was imperative for the press, for the electronic media, for the news media, that they should play a positive role while they are presenting to the public what actually transpired in the course of hearing. But that should not be publicized, Supreme Court said, in a manner to garner publicity, to sensationalize it, because that runs with a danger of a serious risk of causing prejudice to the case as a whole, and you can't hold a suspect or accused guilty even before such an order is actually passed by the court. How can you do that? But that's happening every day in the TV studios. Moreover, the Supreme Court has also asserted that it was required from persons at the helm of affairs to ensure that a trial by media should not hamper fair investigations by the investigating agency and should not prejudice the right of defense of an accused in any manner. But today, all TV anchors are chief investigators, as if nobody knows. They're like Sherlock Holmes, multiplied by 1 million. Lastly, I would, I also remember again a beautiful judgment by the Kerala High Court of 1988, if I'm not if I'm not forgetting the year. It's Jayarajan's case, where the court said that the existence of free press is an inevitable necessity, in maintaining parliamentary democracy, which I had mentioned in my earlier part of the lecture as well. The press occupies an unenviable position because they are the eyes and ears of the general public. They act on behalf of the general public. That's what the court said. Their right is not greater than the public. They are the trustees for the general public. So they are also governed by the same fundamental duties which general public is governed by. The court, basically settled that the media does not enjoy any power larger than the public it represents. So the journalists are encumbered with additional accountability. Yes, for what they write is likely to influence the public to a greater degree, than an ordinary citizen. An ordinary citizen makes a statement, it may not be that influential, but if a media house or a channel or a respectable journalist is making a statement, it can cause a lot of prejudice and it can become a believable statement. There is a code of ethics issued by the News Broadcasting Association also, but that organization is without teeth to my understanding. Now, coming to the end of my lecture, I would like to refer to some recent observations here, like Bombay High Court, wanted media to exercise restraint. They directed them to exercise restraint in Sushant Singh Rajput's case, which would, which could cause prejudice to the investigation. And a similar order was also passed by the Delhi High Court in favor of actress Rakul Preet Singh, when she approached the court with regard to all the rumor mongering which was happening in TV studios with regard to the drug consumption, alleged drug consumption by her, for the case which is being investigated by Narcotics Control Bureau in Bollywood. So friends, today, if you watch news channels, you will see all people from all walks of life, political commentators, lawyers, former judges, police officers, former police officers, bureaucrats, and each one is aggressively contending to share their views. Aggressively, they're contending to share their views and opinion. The whole panel discussion gives you a feel of free for all. It's like a free for all courtroom where the person who is under investigation or trial is declared guilty and a convict time and again. He's maligned, his family is maligned. I don't know under which provision of law these discussions are happening. The freedom of speech and expression may be a fundamental right, but it comes with a blade of restrictions. With every right, there is a corresponding duty. While running a media campaign, be it electronic, press, or social media, be mindful that you have a duty and obligation towards the right to reputation of the concerned person. Yes, who you are targeting, the right to his privacy or her privacy, decency, morality, and above all, the law of the land. So as a conclusion, I will only say that in today's time, many or most think that whoever controls media controls the minds and culture of the people. Yes, that's the perception. But I would vociferously propagate that inculcate discipline in you so that you do not let this melodramatic media steal your quality time. Stop watching these media trials. Stop watching them. And these trials will eventually end. If you won't watch these faked trials, these trials will fall flat on their face. Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm over with my lecture. Yeah, so I mean, I would be open to taking any questions.
Tanya, you're not audible. Sure, sir.
Tanya,
Janvi, now I
Tanya,
request
you
you to
can
please
take up the
start with the
question.
question answers.
So here are some questions from our participants.
Right.
The first question, sir, to what extent are restraint necessary on media?
To what extent?
Yes, sir.
Well, see, I would say that, as I mentioned that, you can't paint the entire media as being unfair and biased and prejudicial or unethical. So wherever anybody feels that his or her own reputation has been put at stake, or some prejudice has been caused, or even in public interest, a third party, because that concept has still not been acknowledged much by the court. Even you or me, while watching a television, we feel that somebody is being treated unfairly and in a prejudicial manner. We should be able to approach the court, and those matters should be treated as urgent and immediate, which means that they should be taken up out of turn, because by the time, if the matter gets delayed, the deed is already done, the damage is already done. So therefore the restraint is necessary in the deserving cases, and not only necessary, but it should be urgent and immediate as well.
Okay, thank you, sir. So moving on to the next question. Do you think India has ineffective legal norms governing journalistic conduct?
Can you come again on that?
Sure, sir. So do you think India has ineffective legal norms governing journalistic conduct?
Absolutely, because all these governing authorities like News Broadcast Corporation, etc., they do not have coercive powers. They are not backed by statutory powers. So definitely, I feel that there is a need for a specific statute. As of now, we lean on Indian Penal Code, or we lean on Information Technology Act to get relief with regard to disciplining of media or journalists or reporters, as the case may be. Excuse me. And so therefore, it is really imperative that the Parliament or the law framers should think of passing a specific law dealing with how to monitor and discipline the bad media. More so, as we are seeing so many judgments coming in from different high courts and even district courts, for that matter, and Supreme Court, no doubt, about how to sort of control, monitor, and discipline media. Now, those judgments are actually have taken form of statute for us. We treat them as law. So I think based on those judgments or the contents of those judgments, it would not be that difficult to pass a specific law, which definitely India lacks as of now.
Thank you, sir. So moving on to the next question. For many years, it is again and again said that the conflict between media trial and fair trial can be balanced with cases by judicial acumen. However, we can't deny the fact of its failure in past years. Can you please give some example where it can be balanced properly?
Well, I would say that as in the past 2 decades, we have seen passage of specific legislation in different segments of disputes and conflicts. Whether it is insolvency, it is competition law, it is consumer laws, consumer disputes, and so on and so forth. So I feel that why we sometimes notice a bit of an imbalance is because most of these conflicts, or should I say disputes and complaints by the aggrieved, are taken to the writ courts under the Constitution of India, which are already overburdened, like High Court and Supreme Court. There is no judicial forum per se like for environment, we have National Green Tribunal. Likewise, if we could have a very specific judicial authority, not these, quasi judicial or administrative platforms, where people take their complaints, which are predominantly controlled, politically or by the cartelization. So I feel that the imbalance is predominantly because of the absence of a specific judicial forum to deal with such conflicts, disputes, and cases.
Thank you, sir. So the next question, how far do you think media trial affect the judicial process?
Well, as I had mentioned, and it was acknowledged even by Justice Kurian Joseph, that judges are also human being, and today media is something which has mushroomed, and you are most of the time on your smartphone. When you enter your home, you are watching television. You open your laptop, there is there is news and videos and discussions and debates, pouncing on you. Having said that, I feel that judges definitely are qualified to brush aside any of these outside influences. However, in their subconscious mind, something can still continue to weigh. And as was said by Justice Cardozo of the American Supreme Court, that subconsciously, we do get influenced. So that is why, in some countries, when the jury is appointed, the jury is not permitted to leave the hotel or the room where till the time the trial is over, and they are not permitted to make any phone calls. They are not permitted to watch any television, because an independent, impartial, and unbiased verdict is expected from the jury. But in the current circumstances, it will be next to impossible to sort of insulate the judges from outside media, voice, press, and so on and so forth. So the only way we can, I'm going a step ahead from the question what you have asked. So, at the first instance, I would answer in the affirmative that yes, judiciary does get influence. And secondly, I would say in order to prevent that, one would have to put some embargo on the media with regard to discussing the trial or the legal cases subjectively and relatively. That should not happen. There should be factual discussion, and that should be purely within the four corners or domains of the case. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. So the next question, media trial seems to have become a reflection of corporations who fundamentally benefit from TRPs for profit. Should there be a separate way of monitoring profit margins for a TV-based media outlets to curb on the content driven by TRP ratings?
Yeah, this question was also raised by one very eminent journalist during a debate, where he said that the criteria for a successful channel should be the quality of reporting, and not the quantum of viewing. So quality versus quantum, or quantum versus quality. Well, there again, an element of subjectivity will come, but I would still consider that it's not a bad idea, because I mean, if the judgment as to quality of reporting is dependent on a team of experts with impeccable reputation, then I would say that, I would favor quality versus quantum, because quantum can be rigged, as we have seen that there are ongoing investigations which are happening in Bombay with regard to the TRP having been rigged. So quantum can always be rigged. It's not difficult, no matter how many modules or safeguards you implant into a system. People will be able to manage and buy the viewership. However, quality is something which cannot be bought. That is something which has to appeal to the intellect and the logic of the viewers concerned. So if some methodology can be worked out in the direction of qualitative yardstick, I mean, I would favor that, though it is not easy to work out that model, but I would definitely go in for quality as against quantity.
Okay, thank you, sir. So moving on to the next question. The journey of media from passion to fashion endorses the selling of human values. What could be done to make media realize their duties and that they have deviated from the path?
Well, at the end, there I would slightly sort of differ with the inbuilt thought which is there in this question, what you have raised. These TV channels are not national run channels. They are run as commercial establishments. They are run as business establishments. And profitability is vital for any business establishment because, it's question of viability of a channel. You have to pay salaries, you have to take care of your working capital and so on and so forth. Now, how do you make a business profitable? You make a business profitable by doing what your consumer likes, by doing what your user likes. And in case of media, what your viewer likes. Now, without crossing the boundary of obscenity, immorality, if they have deviated from their traditional role, I would not question that because times have changed. I was born in 1967 and until 1980s, I had not seen television. The television was a luxury which was which was affordable only for rich people. And there was black and white TV, and that too, 1 in 10,000 or would have television. And there was no phone. Then came landline, and when we used to call somebody international, there was a waiting of 12 hours, 18 hours, because we used to do a trunk call. Then the whole system evolved. We got colored plastic screen, which will have one color or two colors or multicolor. You will just put it on the television, black and white. It will make it multicolored. Then came Asian Games, the color television was launched. Mobile phones came in early 90s. So, there has been an evolution in technology. And, today we are living in a completely wireless world. Everything is wireless. I'm addressing you. I'm addressing, more than 250 people. And there is, I don't see any wire, it's all, it's a wireless system. So why I'm giving you this example is that today, in today's time, when the evolution happens, it's difficult to stop that. As Victor Hugo said, that the idea whose time has come cannot be stopped. So we cannot go in the reverse. We have to live with this modernization. The only thing what we have to do is that we have to work out a system of self-governance, self-discipline, and checks and balances in order to deal with the changing times. But you can't put a lid on the evolution. You can't do that. It's next to impossible.
Thank you, sir. Sir, one more question. The CID on 15th October stated through affidavit in the Supreme Court, the right under Article 19, Clause 1, Subclause A, is not a shield which can be used against any a commission of crime under the extent of criminal law of the land. Yeah. What is your say on it, sir?
Yeah, absolutely. That is true. I mean, you can, whenever we talk about fundamental right, we talk about an element of absolute right, which can never be there. Every fundamental right has got an inbuilt corresponding obligation. I mean, I will not even say duty, an obligation. Duty, sometimes people feel it's a duty, you may do it or you may not do it. There is an obligation with it. When, for instance, freedom of speech and expression. Freedom of speech and expression comes with an inbuilt obligation that I am not supposed to be abusive. I'm not supposed to breach somebody's privacy. I'm not supposed to breach somebody's decency. I'm not supposed to outrage somebody's modesty. I am not supposed to assume the role of a judge or an investigating agency or a criminal. You see today how journalists are shoving their mics into the mouths of police officers, into general public, which it's quite intimidating. It is not investigative journalism. It is sensationalization. It is too dramatic, basically it gives you excitement. It is entertaining. It may be entertaining, but at the cost of whom? At the cost of somebody's breach. Somebody's life is being breached, and it is being portrayed and displayed as entertainment. You can't do that. So therefore, I would definitely agree that it's high time we have to draw a line somewhere. As citizens, our rights have been checked time and again by courts of law. Media has enjoyed a special privilege because they have reach over people. So authorities fear them that tomorrow they'll run some debate, some program which will malign us. And once your reputation is maligned, it's people say memories are short. I don't think memories are short. When somebody's reputation is marred, it is very difficult to get a status quo ante. You can't restore his reputation back to the intact reputation stage. It's difficult. Damage is already done. So what people do basically by getting gag orders is that no further harm should be caused. Some harm is already caused. But I have never seen, these aggrieved parties getting compensation or journalists having been put behind bars and all that. Some small time journalists may have been, but I haven't seen the influential reporters and journalists, having faced any criminal action per se. They get away with apologies.
Thank you, sir. So moving on to the last question. Can court can't take suo motu against the media trial when they discuss the judgment, when it is not allowed?
No, well, see, insofar as judgment is concerned, that once the judgment is passed, it can be discussed. The whole problem is only when the trial is going on or when the investigation is going on, because that's the time prejudice can be caused. Once the judgment is passed, and if the media is discussing judgment on merits, that where they feel that the judgment was misfounded or the judges had erred in passing that judgment, as they did not appreciate some substantive points of law or facts, that is doable. But while doing that, you cannot start declaring judges as corrupt, or they were influenced by virtue of reasons other than merits. You can't make those accusations against judges. If you have any substance of accusing the judiciary, then that has to be dealt with not publicly. There is a system of bringing it to the knowledge of the relevant authorities, to point out that the judgment delivered had a background to it, which was something, which need to be looked into. Now, so that is the only part where the courts can step in and really sort of put an injunction and restraint order on the media trial, where the judge's conduct is being discussed. So I'm against that as well. You can't start discussing judges' conduct more so, because judges are absolutely helpless and unable to defend themselves. When the judges start coming to media, then the whole system will collapse. So it is very unfair to the judges by when media starts hitting them while they have no opportunity to defend themselves. Even in parliament, if you see the speaker or the chairman in the Rajya Sabha, they don't allow anybody to be named who's not present in the house, because that is unfair to those people. So likewise, I feel that it is unfair to them, and judges can definitely grant restraint order against the media trials if their conduct is being discussed, not if the facts of the case are being discussed. Judgment stage I'm talking about. I'm not talking about trial stage, investigation stage. Yes, they should interfere and put a restraint order. Yes, because that can cause prejudice to the accused as well as to the prosecution.
Thank you so much, sir, for clearing out the doubts of the participants. Now I would like to call Tanya.
Tanya, you're not audible. I request Professor Dr. Rajesh Bahuguna, sir, to please conclude the session.
All right. Thank you. Thank you so much, Tanya. Uh, at the end of this very informative, interactive session, I can just say that there is no substitute to the knowledge, experience, and global exposure, which is seen today by every one of us. The topic was very relevant and contemporary, and the way Mr. Batra had presented it, I can say it was not only for the law students, but even the man of the common parlance could have understood it in the better way. His methodology, when he started the concept of media law, what the media law is, what it covers, whether it is only television, Facebook, social medias, he has touched conceptually everything. Then medial trial he has taken in the legal perspective, and he has explained the role of media. The better part of that, what I have seen, it was not the only criticizing part of the media, but he start from, he just show the mirror that you are the fourth pillar. And he say what should have been the role of media. I appreciate it when he condemns the chief investigation and coined the investigative journalism. This is what has been in the first part of a thing. Then he has put some light. Why media trial and why should media trial not to be? He has touched the relevant sections in CRPC and also some of the article of the Constitution of India. Even the Contempt of the Court Act 1971. All those provisions which have been either in favor or against the subject. Another best thing, he has not only given his own opinion, but very honestly giving the names and quoting the researcher, philosopher, thinkers, and scholars of the world. When he speaks about the judges, he speaks about the Honorable Mr. Justice Kurian sir, he talk about Cordozovo Benjamin, he talk about so many judges. He refers the verdicts of the Honorable High Court of Bombay, Delhi, and also the Apex Court, Supreme Court of India. This is how the concept has been made clear to all of us. His observations, some of the suggestions, which I should say, which comes from the legal luminaries and which are very relevant for the lawmakers, which has come during his speech, but more suggestions and effective suggestions I have seen in the session when he was answering to the different questions. And at this juncture, I must appreciate to the audience also around 250 plus audience were watching Mr. Batra's speech from India and abroad. And 70 plus questions. I should not say only questions, the meaningful questions, relevant questions. Not question to ask question, but the question which are supposed to be asked. And we needed from the legal luminary like Mr. Batra were asked. And when I see the question part, it has been answered that what should be the extent of the restriction or media trial. Whether the present Indian legal system is effective enough to control the menace of this all going on. Question was also on judicial activism, effective media trial, TRP and all, selling of the human values, right, absolute right, and suo motu actions also. And almost all the questions have been replied in very, very effective manners. Now, at the end, when he say that there is a need for a specific statute, and that too based on the judgment given by the apex courts, is the one of the most important suggestions which have been put forward by Mr. Batra. So at this juncture, before society president tender the formal vote of thanks, I am taking this privilege to appreciate the organization, that Training and Recruitment Division of Law College Dehradun, Uttaranchal University, for organizing so wonderful international lecture series, and for inviting Mr. Batra here. And to Mr. Batra, I feel I can ask you one thing after this situation is over, COVID-19. On our request, please do visit Law College Dehradun, Uttaranchal University on our invitation, so that we have 2,000 plus students of law on the roll. They can be benefited by your speech. It's a very old college. Law College Dehradun was established in 2002, and it became Uttaranchal University with passing of Uttaranchal University Act in 2012-13. So we'll be looking for your blessing to my students.
Definitely.
As and when time permits. So with this, thank you so much. Once again, my all the blessing to TRD, team TRD, Akanksha Bhatt and all. Over to Tanya.
Thank you so much, sir. Participants are requested to fill the attendance form through the link provided in the chat box. Now, I would request to call Akanksha ma'am to convey the vote of thanks.
Thank you, Janvi. Good afternoon, everybody. I, on behalf of Law College Dehradun, Uttaranchal University, consider it as an honor to extend today's vote of thanks. I extend my most sincere thanks to the keynote speaker of the event, Mr. Hemant Batra, sir, the Vice President of SARC Law, for taking out his precious time in joining us for this wonderful and very edifying lecture, sir. Thank you very much. Thank you. As it is that every event requires support, I also thank the Dean of Law College Dehradun, Professor Dr. Rajesh Bahuguna, sir, for giving us the opportunity to organize the event. I extend my gratitude towards the Head of Department Law, Law College Dehradun, Professor Dr. Poonam Rawat ma'am, for her continuous support and guidance. I also thank all the participants that have actively participated in the lecture from all across the globe. And last but not the least, I thank all the members of the organizing committee of Training and Recruitment Division for making this event a successful one. So thank you everybody. Thank you so much for joining us, sir.
Okay.
With your permission, sir, we shall now. Yes, sir.
Miss Akansha Bhatt, I am receiving so many messages from students that they could not attend it for so many reasons. So you can announce that the entire speech will be available on the YouTube channel of Uttaranchal University. So they can view from there. That message you can circulate through Student Information Center.
Sure,
Thank
sure,
you.
sir. Yes, sir. The same, the video for the lecture will be uploaded on the YouTube channel. We'll be sharing the links with everybody through mail or SIC. Thank you so much, everybody. With your
Thank you.
permission, sir, we shall end the
Thank
meeting
you.
now. Thank you.
Thank you, Batra Saab. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor.